Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Unlock the Door Radio. This is your host, Michael Cross here, hoping to provide you with some really stimulating information and commentary. And hey, like I always say, question authority, question me. I don't care. But, question the things that are going on around you at all times. And try to see past what other people are trying to get across to you. Now, tonight, what I thought I would like to do is a rather unique show. I've noticed that there's been a lot more popularity of zombie movies. You've got stuff like there's a whole bunch of them that are out there, but of course on TV you even have The Walking Dead, which seems to have really become quite a hit. I noticed that even my wife, who hates zombie movies and TV shows, I happened to come across the first episode on Netflix, and I thought, I'll take a look, see what it's all about. It's probably like every other zombie show. And then I watched it and thought, wow, this is actually quite unique. And then I was able to persuade my wife, who was just like, okay, I'll watch it, okay. And now she's just totally hooked. We're almost done with season 2, and we'll start season 3 very soon. Now, I'm just wondering why all of a sudden these kinds of films have grown in popularity. Why have they overtaken the vampire movies? And that particular archetype that was popular. What is our fascination with this very, very strong image of death? I mean, much more than other horror movies where you see scenes of death. But in zombie movies, the whole thing is not only seeing people who get killed and usually eaten in very nasty manners, very creative manners, but also the fact that all of your antagonists are crowds of dead people. And so your object if you were imagining yourself in one of these movies or video games, I forgot, those are popular too, is to go through and plow through these people and get rid of them. They're not people. They're dead. They're just corpses that have a very low level of brain activity in the hypothalamus. That's the way it's explained in the Walking Dead show. And all the stuff that we would consider the higher functions of thought and reasoning and who we really are is dead. And so therefore there should be no guilt in going out and finishing these people off. Now, I have some theories about this, and this might sound a little controversial, but I'm going to get into them in a lot more detail. I just want to note that I just sent in my manuscript for the third book in the series, Freedom from Conscience, in which it centers around a young woman who just happens to be a vigilante serial killer. Of course, one that is more of the Clint Eastwood, Charles Bronson style, that is going after bad people. But this one, Freedom from Conscience, and it'll be called Freedom from Conscience, Deliverance from Evil, centers around her being kidnapped, actually, by a serial killer who is looking forward to the apocalypse, the end of society, and the idea that eventually civilization will collapse. He lives out in this remote area of eastern Oregon around Hermiston, and his idea is that everything's going to just cease to exist, and that the cities will collapse, and there will be just people killing and eating each other and stuff in the streets. But he's gonna survive it. And of course, when he goes out and kills people, he just figures they're dead anyway. So he's got a vendetta against God, basically. So he feels that if he destroys creation, then that's his way of getting back at God for a very severe tragedy he experienced. But I'd like to examine this whole idea, and basically, I'm going to present the idea that perhaps this is a glimpse into our future. Maybe there is a that whole Carl Jung idea of the collective unconsciousness. And maybe, just maybe, it's a fear that we have that civilization will collapse, that everything that we know will come to an end. And then maybe the zombies. Well, I'll go into way more detail about this, but the zombies represent all those people after civilization collapses, the leftovers who will rampage through the countryside and basically be eating everything that's in their path. Now, that's a pretty dismal view, obviously, but it's one that, if we look at psychology, might actually be part of the popularity. But anyway, let's give a little bit of psychological background. Now, first, I want to compare the zombie films to the vampire film. Now, in a Freudian sense, a vampire is somewhat of a zombie. I mean, the vampire is dead, but he or she is still enjoying life. As opposed to a zombie, the vampire has full senses, has maybe not even just the intelligence they had when they died and became a vampire, but also all the accumulated knowledge and insights that maybe they've lived through for hundreds of years, or maybe thousands. If anyone ever watched the movie The Hunger, the female vampire in that, they show scenes from ancient Egypt, so you get the idea she's thousands of years old. But the idea in a vampire archetype is essentially the vampire represents somewhat of the id, the idea of what we would be like if we could have everything we wanted, the idea of immortal life. You never age. All vampires seem to be these seductive, uh, rather cool types of I'm not going to say villain, because often now when they do come out, they're presented either as villains or as heroes, but they are usually quite cool. They're not like the vampires you see in like Chinese horror movies, where they're just like these rotting corpses that drink your blood. But instead, they're like almost aristocratic. And I would say that from a Freudian standpoint, the vampire popularity might come in from this repressed sexuality. The vampire represents that. He or she is just, they do what they want with whoever they want to, and can live out all those fantasies, except they can't go out at daytime. But they're they're people, but they're beyond people. So I would say in that sense, the vampire represents the id, what Freud talked about. And normally we keep our id under control. We don't let those impulses come out. But if you watch a good vampire flick or something, you can relate, and what Freud called catharsis. You're able to kind of relieve some of those tensions that are built up by repressing the primal urges. Now, I don't want to spend that much time on vampires. I want to go back into the zombies. Now, how in the world would you account for the popularity, both psychologically and maybe metaphorically, of zombies? They're well. I'm getting ahead of myself there. Let's go back to what Freud had as one of his more controversial theories. he had the idea of what's called thanatos. I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but it sounds as I was sounding it out best I can. Thanatos. Now, thanatos refers to this. Freud believed that we have the instinct to live. We have a very strong instinct, not just to survive, but also to reproduce, to make more of us, to send ourselves, our ego, in a sense, even though it's projected into our children, into the future, so that you have a connection with the future. I guess Freud had a large family, so he felt that very strongly. I suppose people that choose not to have families, they're sort of saying, well, I don't care about the future and let it end with me. Kind of sad and depressing, but it seems to be the case in some people. But anyway, let's just say that Thanatos is a correct theory. Now, the idea is, along with most of Freud's theories, and of course, definitely with Jung's theories, is that everything seems to be balanced in our lives. The id is balanced, for instance, by the superego. The superego is what tells us what not to do. You may see a cute, if you're a guy, you see a woman, or a woman, you see a guy, and your brain's actually clicks on with the lust mode. It's saying, your brain, certain parts of your brain, are basically saying, I want to reproduce with that person. That's why you think that person's attractive physically. You don't know them. You don't know them from a psychological viewpoint, so therefore you can't love them. You can't even like them. But you see them and you're thinking, wow, she's really hot. And you're attracted to them. Now, you could look at that as an evolutionary thing, or maybe God's way of throwing the bait out there, so you continue the human race. I mean, in Genesis, it does say that the man and woman's desires are aimed towards each other. So, I mean, I hear some people, religious people say, "Oh, it's wrong to lust after people." Well, it depends on your definition of lust. I mean, if you're lusting, like you really want, you're fantasizing about taking that person behind the woodshed, and, doing stuff, then I would say that's wrong from a Christian standpoint. But without lust, you don't have attraction, and without attraction, you don't have love, and without love, you don't make babies. In that sense. So therefore, this is part of what has to happen in society, and of course, we usually balance that out. I mean, not even Bill Clinton runs after every woman he sees and has sex with her. No one does that. We have constraints that are built into us. Not to do that, either A, because you feel it's wrong, B, because you feel like if you did that, you might get beat up or thrown in jail or shot or whatever. But the thing is, there are constraints that 99.99% of the people do experience. But those feelings are still down there. They're just repressed. Now, Freud felt that there was a balance to this id, not just the superego that's saying, naughty, naughty, don't do that. Don't walk up to that person and say, proposition them right on the street. The other part Freud felt was the idea of a death instinct. The idea that there's a part of us that feels compelled not just to survive and to thrive, but also to destroy not only ourselves, but those things around us. So if you think about those times when you were a kid and you build a sandcastle at the beach, and then, you make it really intricate. You might spend, an hour or two making this perfect sandcastle. And then what do? You derive pleasure from kicking it over and stepping on it and tearing it up. Um, there is this kind of thing that's built into us, it seems, that we really do enjoy destroying. And come on, you know, what catches people's attention on TV? Death. Um, I remember a song. I can't remember the actual name of the song, but there was, I think it was called "Dirty Laundry." I think it was back in the early '90s, and it was talking about how the media fixates on death and to sell, to get the ratings up and things like that. And I think that's actually true. You if you talk about these kinds of things where people die, then that catches our attention. If you the military discovered that in the Iraq invasion in 1991, the Persian Gulf War, whatever you want to call it, and the the media had really undermined. I mean, in the sense, if you supported the war in Vietnam, really undermined the effort in Vietnam, because they would show you nasty pictures of kids and villagers and stuff, being killed and tortured and so forth by the military. It would also show you pictures of young men, these poor 18-year-old working class guys that were drafted and maybe from Appalachia or from a ghetto or whatever, and they couldn't afford college, so they couldn't get a deferment. So they they go off there and you see them shot up, and but you saw that, and people went, no, 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 no. Because they could relate to these people on an individual basis, because they actually saw the people's faces. They saw the bleeding and burning and stuff like that. And that elicited sympathy and empathy in most people. Maybe not politicians, but most people do have empathy. And that reduced the support for the war. Now, the military decide I think the military figured something out by 1991. And that is, if you control the message, you control the masses. And so that was the first war that I would say was very similar to a video game, in which they showed pictures on the TV, and military guy would point to a bridge. I still remember a lot of these where they'd point to a bridge. You'd see images of trucks from a distance going over that bridge, and suddenly there's a flash, and the military guy up there talking to all the media is going, see, got it. I still remember one in which there was one guy that was like, he was like on a bicycle or something, and he makes it across the bridge while everyone else gets blown up. And the guy says, "Well, that's one lucky dude," or something like that. And all these media people are laughing about this. The thing is, from a distance, it was kind of cool. I mean, you mentally know what just happened. You just know that maybe, I don't know, if they were troop carriers, maybe 30, 40, 50 men just got blown up. Those men had brothers and sisters, maybe kids, wives, certainly parents. But the only thing you saw was casualty figures, numbers. And that dehumanized it. So when it dehumanizes it, then it makes it a little bit more interesting, but you still have that kind of disconnect slash connect. And you still get that kind of, I don't know, in a Freudian sense, that kind of guilty pleasure watching these kinds of things. I remember when they had the tsunami back around, well, the early part of this century. Sounds old, doesn't it? And there was a site that was published that was saying, send in all of your videos, because there was a lot. That was the first real big giant disaster where people actually did have video cameras and so forth, that were, because it had gone more mainstream. And it was basically saying, send them in, we won't censor them, just whatever. And they were having trouble because so many people were trying to get on there. And the reason for that is because you actually saw scenes of destruction that were being censored on the mainstream media. And, well, I mean, yeah, there's that kind of guilty type of thing that goes into it. So, if this is actually part of human nature, this sense of build it up, tear it down, maybe there's a part of us that feels, oh, I want this entropy. But most of us, I mean, the scales are weighed heavily on survival. Then basically you may have a situation in which there's still that little part of us that is buried deep in the subconscious that needs to be stimulated in some way. Now, that could explain why we like horror movies. Why is it that the things that scare us and so forth attract us? Now, why is that? Why should that feel in some way compelling for us to watch? And then if we extend that, of course, all horror movies involve death. Even the old giant spider movies of the 50s. You saw the spider's legs and the I don't know the farmer screaming, and they didn't show you anything, but you knew he just got eaten by the big giant tarantula. The thing is that the if we look at zombie movies, that's the ultimate. You've got the maybe that primordial fear of contagion. I mean, think of it. Disease is something that we really do fear deep down. I mean, there's that part of us. We don't fear as much car accidents. We don't fear as much even invasions and so forth. But the idea of a disease that we can't see, that scares us. And so maybe that would touch on that whole Thanatos thing. Now, all the zombie films relate to this idea of a disease or some sort of radiation or gas or something. Usually the gas is released by the military accidentally, or there's a whole bunch of different ways the zombie apocalypse occurs. I've always thought it'd be kind of cool to have one in which nanotechnology gone wrong. Kind of half brings you to life, and and then you go out and do nasty things. But the idea of the zombie films is essentially that the contagion hits, like a plague. Lots of people get infected, lots of people die, lots of people come back to life. So now not only do you have that fear of death that might stalk you in the sense of, oh, there's a body. The body's animated. The body can come and come after you and can still cause you harm. It can actually kill and eat you. Or worse yet, it can eat you while you're still alive, and in that way it kills you. Now, the thing is, I'm going to give you a little brief history of these zombie films. Now, maybe you remember this. In the 1950s, zombie films were mostly dealing with voodoo. You had at least in the West. You had some evil voodoo doctor in Haiti or Cuba or something like that, and he's able to bring the dead back to life and then have them do his bidding. So it was kind of like an animated body, but you still had someone in control of it, and they didn't eat people. They just kind of wandered around and looked like, I don't know, people going out and Christmas shopping right now. The blank stare on their face, just wandering through the mall or your Walmart or something, and trying to find something that's interesting to stimulate them to give away some of their money. But anyway, 1950s, they were zombies. That just they were they just weren't very exciting, really. Zombie films in the 50s were just I feel that they were. I've seen some of them when I was a kid, and they were just kind of boring. Then there was the advent of the modern zombie film, and that came with the whole Night of the Living Dead. Remember that one? I hope you've seen that. That's the classic. That changed everything. No longer was your zombie just a slave to some voodoo priest, but instead, the zombie was a human being that had been brought back to life and was hungry, very hungry. So, I think in Night of the Living Dead, it was a situation in which there was supposed to have been there was like these news reports that people were listening to, and there was some satellite or something that crashed that had been probing some planet, and for some reason the radiation started a an effect in which people start rising from the grave and eating people. That pretty much started the whole modern zombie genre, in which pretty much they're all the same, although most of them try to seem to make some sort of a social statement. Usually have a certain number of people that are that are left, and they kind of bring their baggage of civilization there because now they're a microcosm of civilization. No longer you have the big giant mass, but now you just have this small group. And usually the ones in the 60s and 70s seem to really play on things like oh, I don't know, they deal a lot with racism and sexism and all these other kinds of isms within the context of the movie. And usually by the end, it was pretty depressing. I mean, in the end, they might escape, but then you see that the place they're escaping to is also overrun or something like that. So I can't think of any zombie films that really had happy endings. Oh wait, there was one. There was one. I can't remember which one. One of them was more economic. Oh, what was that? It had the Dennis Hopper in it, I think, and you had really rich people that had this little enclave in this really expensive apartment complex, and then they had it blocked off so uninfected people and zombies couldn't get in, and the uninfected people couldn't seek refuge, and the zombies couldn't get in there to eat anyone. And that was one that was a little unique because it was almost like the kind of a play on the whole bourgeoisie proletariat type of thing. I can't remember the name of that right offhand. And anyway, the that brings me to I'm going to center a little bit on The Walking Dead. In there, we don't. Well, at least I haven't got through season 3, so I don't know. But it doesn't. You don't really know what causes it. You don't know what really causes everyone to start zombifying. But it seems that what happens is this guy, he's a policeman, he comes out of a coma and suddenly finds that the world's just collapsed. And then he goes out and tries to find his family and then try to survive him and his group of people after the apocalypse has taken place. You get the feeling about 99% of people are infected. And so about 99% of the population is dead. And in that film, it's kind of interesting. They deal with the whole idea that the infrastructure is gone. There's there are people that go out and they raid other people and kill people. There are no real you don't the government's gone. I mean, there's a little there may be some pockets of military left, but everything's collapsed. And that what really reminds me of this particular um, series is a History Channel documentary called Armageddon that came out a few years back. If you have a chance, look it up. The History Channel show Armageddon. It's on YouTube. And in that one, what's really fascinating about that is that it's based on the idea that a disease gets out, like similar to the Spanish flu epidemic, and it kills. I don't know if they give an actual figure, but a very small percentage, but maybe only 5 or 10% of the population succumbs to it. But because everyone's scared to death to go to work and go to school, everything falls apart. The infrastructure falls apart, and society breaks down completely. And in this Armageddon, there's a husband, a wife, and their son who are in the middle of a Los Angeles suburb, and they have to get themselves out of there. And I guess ultimately they're trying to get to one of her relatives in Idaho. And what it does is, while they're on their quest to get out of the city, do all these things, they have experts in medicine and survival and military and all kinds of experts that are giving their views on what would happen if this really did occur, if civilization did collapse, if we wound up, and it doesn't take nuclear bombs. It's not something like that. It might be something as simple as a flu epidemic that kills 5 to 10% of the population, because that would shut everything down. And then what would happen is everyone would go into kind of a survival mode. All of a sudden, that neighbor of yours who's nice and calm, kind of like, I don't know, kind of like on The Simpsons. What's his name? Flanders. Yeah, you get that neighbor that's like the Flanders, really nice and everything. But you know what? If Flanders has to winds up running out of food, Flanders may your neighbor may just decide to come after you, because he would feel like he has to, well, not only eat himself but also feed his wife and children. And so um, that can get kind of scary when you figure that, and then you realize, you take a look at these videos of the whole Black Friday thing. I mean, seriously, is that the way people react when they might save half off on toilet paper at the local big box store if they get in early enough? If that is the way people act when they're fed, and you can see from most of them in America, they're very well fed, what's going to happen when the food runs out? How long could you keep food stocked in the stores? I dare say. Well, think about this. Have you ever seen a situation where a food store has had a liquidation sale? I've seen that before. Suddenly they say 60% off on all of our goods because they're wanting to get everything out of there. And if you show up even 6 or 7 hours after they've opened, there's nothing left, essentially, except for the really nasty stuff. Um, it's cleaned out. Now, what happens if all of a sudden the food runs out completely? I mean, everything is interdependent upon everyone coming to work. To get a piece of, I don't know, get a piece of GMO corn from from the farm to your supermarket. Think of how many steps it goes through. The farmer has to actually harvest it. Then someone goes through the whole commodities thing and buys it, then sells it to someone who will then take it from the storage to market in some way. So you have all kinds of shipping and handling, and also dealing back and forth for money. And finally, it gets on a truck and heads out to the store and gets into the store, and then they sell it to you. If any of that is disrupted, uh-oh, the corn's not there. So I've heard that it would take about a day at the most for everything to be cleared out if everything just kind of collapsed. Now, what could cause a collapse? Like I said, you could have a flu epidemic, you could have a major terrorist attack, any number of things could happen. I know during 2012 there was all of these. Oh, what if this and this and this happens? And maybe some people afterwards kind of went, see, it didn't happen. Well, but it could happen still. I mean, it just because it's not 2012 doesn't mean something couldn't happen. I mean, that was all bogus anyway. The whole Mayan calendar thing. The Mayans didn't pick the end of the world. So here's the thing. In the Armageddon documentary, they have to put up with getting out of the city in the first place. And I think they presented a little easy. I mean, they only run into some gangs once, and they're actually able to drive out of the city. I think the roads would look a lot more like in those scenes in The Walking Dead, where the freeways are just cluttered with cars. There's no way really to get out of the city at that point if you've waited that long. Reminds me of some of the stuff Joel Skousen has talked about. Well, anyway, then they go out into the countryside. Then they have to forage. There's one scene where I think they find some kids are roasting their dog because they're hungry, and and they almost get killed trying to when they come in there and they just talk about how everyone would suddenly be defending themselves because I mean, if you're to the point of roasting your pet, you're not going to want someone to just come along and take it from you. So anyway, eventually, of course, it's somewhat of a happy ending. I mean, the family makes it to Idaho, and they talk about everyone having to live like an Amish person after that, which would be the case. I mean, most of what we have today is dependent on high technology, and if that high technology goes away, it's time to live Amish. And yeah, and there's one, not to give away too much, one of the characters scratches themselves, and a simple scratch, but it gets infected and they die because there's no antibiotics left anymore. But anyway, um, it really, really, really does remind me of the Walking Dead series, and I don't know, maybe it's just coincidence, but still, the thing is that what if, as I have my character in my latest novel that's coming out, Deliverance from Evil, Freedom from Conscience, the main character's idea is that what you're going to have if society broke down is the cities are concentrated people. Okay, he explains to the main character in kind of a monologue. The cities are concentrated people. There's not that much food supply there. If people are living in small homes, the rich guys, they live in like if you talk about New York, they're living in upscale apartments in Manhattan. Poor people, of course, are living in ghettos. There's not a lot of in between in the big cities, but they're all living in fairly smaller dwellings. Not too many people have a shed filled with food in it. Usually, the stores, you don't get big giant supermarkets. You get smaller markets. And just think, just imagine what that would be like if that all suddenly collapsed. What if everything was disrupted? Well, what would people do? I mean, of course, there's going to be some people that would just give up. There'd be others that would maintain hope until, I don't know, they starved. There would be some that would actually go out and start raiding. This is, the plot there a little bit that he's talking about. The idea that the cities, you would have people starting to go out of the cities looking for greener pastures, and then of course they would run smack into the suburbs, and then you would have major fights there between the various groups. I guess basic my basic guess would be that the government, if this ever happened, that what was ever left of the government would probably side with the suburban elements of the population, just because that's where they come from. So sometimes when I hear some of the conspiracy people talk about, oh, the government's going to come out and come after Billy Bob and stuff like that, I'm not sure that that's really part of the game plan they're if they're actually storing up all this military hardware at domestically. I'm wondering if it's actually that is the last people they would actually try to go after. I don't know. But could then of course you would have battles and so forth. It wouldn't be a civil war. It would look more like, well, it might be. It might look like Syria, where you have various factions just going at each other's throats. But it wouldn't be the gray versus the blue. It wouldn't be that kind of situation. And that's why I'm wondering, could the zombie films that we are seeing, could those be a metaphor? Or, like I said, it could be a collective unconscious thing, but could it be a metaphor? Could the zombies be the hordes of people that you would have going after the people that did store things away? And if that's the case, if that's what it's playing up to, is this some? I mean, I gotta say this before I get into more of the metaphysical things. I've noticed in a lot of these films, there's always comments made like, "Oh, I wish I had if I'd known this was happening, I would have stored up on things. If I'd known this was happening, I would have bought this or I'd have bought that. Oh, I wish I had this, but the stores that we found empty don't have it anymore." Even in there was a comedy zombie film. I think it was it called Zombieland, in which the main character is just like he's desperately trying to find Twinkies because there's no Twinkies, and you think, well, if he had known it was coming, he could have at least bought a few boxes and had them stored away instead of risking his life sometimes to see if he can find some Twinkies. But anyway, if this is this fear that people have subconsciously, and this is how they can subconsciously deal with it by watching this, what does that really? Is this some way of maybe, I don't know? Is there a metaphysical thing out there that someone is trying to warn us to say maybe we should stock up, maybe we should be prepared? I mean, you have the whole thing about God works in mysterious ways. What if all of the people that are producing these zombie novels and comic books and movies and TV series and stuff like this, I mean, to like a fundamentalist Christian, they'd be going, wow, that's not right. But no, seriously, how do we know they aren't being inspired to give us a warning? And it doesn't have to be. Everyone thinks, oh, it's a man-made thing. New World Order is going to do this or whatever. There are so many natural things that can happen that suddenly everyone's hungry. So I'm just wondering, and I'm thinking to myself, how would you survive? Think about this. How would you survive this so-called zombie apocalypse if suddenly you found yourself in the middle of this? First of all, the thing that goes through your mind right off is you can't survive alone. And if you're alone, you're gone in these movies because you got to be on guard all the time. It's gonna be hard for you to safeguard your stuff. And when you got 5,000 zombies knocking at your door, it's kind of hard to send them away. Now, there's an African proverb I heard the evolutionary psychologist Christopher Ryan once said. He said that the best place to store your spare food, this is an event of no refrigeration, is in your stomach, is in the stomach of your neighbor or best friend or whatever. And that just makes me think. The I don't have, I had to get some wood. Someone offered me some wood a couple months ago. They had to cut some trees down, and I didn't. I needed it. I mean, it's better than having to buy it. And what but I had to get it out of there within a couple weeks. And I thought about all my options because I didn't have the right, I didn't have the way to transport it. So what I did was I went to my neighbor who I knew did have a trailer, and I said, "Tell you what, how about I have some wood, we go half and half, and you transport it. We both go over there, we saw it up with the chainsaws, come back, and then we just divide it." And we did that. And I guess it's sometimes it's better to have half of something rather than all of nothing, because eventually they would have just called someone to come over and haul the trees away. And I'm wondering if this is something maybe we should start thinking about. Again, I'm not too worried unless someone does some sort of weird nanotechnology thing and, they don't do it right. And all of a sudden, people that have these repair things in their bloodstream, uh, we have to worry about them all coming after us. I don't think that's going to happen, personally. I don't see that ever happening. But I do foresee that you could have the haves versus the have-nots in the event of a disaster. Now, I'm wondering, most of the people listening to this probably live in a house, and that means you've got neighbors. What have you done to actually encourage your neighbors to become like prepping? I don't like that word. I don't know why it is. I mean, it's it's a good thing. I'm just saying I don't like the word, but I don't. but that's what's out there in the public right now, prepping or being prepared. Have you done anything to get your neighbors prepared? Wouldn't it be better if, like I said, that your neighbors have a full stomach in event of a disaster than an empty one? I'm not talking about the idea that they're just you have to watch them starve. And again, unless you're a psychopathic politician, I mean, it's going to bother you watching your neighbors starve to death. Most people that would bother. I mean, some people it wouldn't. They'd be just like, well, it looks like Harry didn't make it out today. But most of us it would bother. And of course, you got some of the, I don't know, the super religious people that would be saying, oh, well, I'll just open up my pantry and share with my neighbors. Well, that's kind of nice, except that what happens when all your neighbors take all your food and you're kind of left with nothing? That could be a problem then. Now you're the one out there, looking for something to eat. So I'm just thinking, the more people out there with this idea that prepping's a good idea, the safer it is for you and me, especially if you're in the suburbs or the rural areas. It's much better that everyone kind of stores things away. Now, I will say this. Sometimes people get into this like survivalist mode, and they suddenly think that, well, I need to get my neighbor to get themselves an AR-15, and then they need to do this, and then they need to, have set up a wind generator out on their property and that sort of thing. Probably you're trying to convert someone that way. It's not going to work that well. Maybe it's better just to kind of slowly encourage them to store food away, because that's your number one thing. You can live without electricity for the most part. You can live without toilet paper. You can live without running water. You can live without a lot of these things. Most people have some access to water they could boil or whatever. I mean, I've seen people that live next to a river and they've got, they they fill up giant water containers. Like, well, if it ever, if anything ever happens, I'll have water. Well, the thing is, you live next to a river. You can easily filter the water out and then boil it and then be okay. I mean, eventually you're going to have to do that anyway, even if you have stored water. The thing is, the food is the number one thing, and the more people that have it, the better. And I think what would happen ultimately is if you try to get this message out, this whole food storage thing. By the way, if you want to find information on food storage, the Mormon Church, if you go to their website, Mormon or LDS or whatever, they have stuff on food storage there that you can get some. And there's a lot of people out there that have blogs. Here's how you do it. There's right ways and wrong ways, obviously. I mean, some stuff you can store for hundreds of years, and and or for a month, lots of ways. You need to know what you have and what uh, possibilities you have there. Now, I think that's stage one. Forward some stuff. I did an interview with a woman on prepping. I think what's the name of it? It's on YouTube. Prepping, not just for safeguarding against future disasters, something like that. Just try the slow exposure, and eventually, I think it will. They'll see the light. They'll think, "Wow, that's a good idea." And if people form these networks, within our churches or synagogues or whatever, and in our social gatherings. If you belong to a hunters club, something like that, come on, that's the best spot to get people because they're halfway there. They understand the idea of living off the land. Then you can get things going. And the second part, I would say, would be, I mean, depending on the laws, you should have things that you can not just protect yourself, also be able to maybe hunt down game, be able to find food and so forth in event of a disaster. And again, depending on where you're at, some people listen to this, no way that they can, weapons. And some people are living in areas where you can own anything. So probably a good idea to at least become proficient in those kinds of things. I mean, even a bow and arrow. I mean, that's you don't have to be Miss Hunger Games type thing. If you've seen that series, which I would recommend strongly, dealing with a dystopian government and what happens when the government takes control over society. And we got a lot of these don't we? This. Any you get the learn how to use these kinds of things. On a related note, learn how to even use an axe. I've actually seen people try to make a people in the that grew up in the cities wanted to take camping because some of them have never even put a worm on a hook. It's like they're like totally like, well, where do I put it in? Isn't there a hole here or something? Oh my gosh. Sounds like something from TSA. But anyway, the thing is that you've got to. If you see them try to make a fire, they take big chunks of wood, put some newspaper under it, and light the newspaper. Then, of course, it doesn't catch. You've got to chop the wood up. Some basic survival skills, everyone. I mean, that's the sad part. During the Great Depression, people knew how to survive. That's the scary part. In the 1920s and 30s, either lived in a rural area or you were probably first generation from a rural area. You knew how to build things. You knew how to build a house. You knew how to build a barn at least, or a chicken coop. You knew how to raise you knew how to raise cows and goats and sheep and stuff like this. That's the reason so many people survived the Great Depression. Now look at it now. I mean, you put a goat out in front of the average person and say, "Can you milk this goat?" They're gonna look at you like, what?" I mean, they're not gonna have any. And if they can't even build a fire, how are they going to survive if all of a sudden it comes down to going back to nature? Which even a pandemic would send us into that, if not permanently, at least for years. I've heard a thing that if you got a good burst of energy from the sun, equal to one that hit the Earth that wiped out the telegraph machines in the 1870s, I think it was. If that happened today, all those nice little gizmos that people are obsessed with, their iPhones, computers, and even their phones, basically your electrical grid, your electrical power plant. That would be over. Okay, nighttime would look like nighttime in North Korea. No lights. Okay, so think about that for a moment. Again, it's not good to obsess that you're. I don't know. Maybe it is good. Maybe people thought Noah was being obsessive when he was out there building a boat. Thought, why is this guy out there wasting time and resources and his money and all this kind of stuff doing this? But the thing, maybe it is. If you're more into the idea of building yourself a shelter or radiation proof stuff like that, more power to you. I mean, if you can afford it and you can do it, that's great. But people shouldn't shut off they can't afford that. Okay? I mean, most people nowadays, if they have a basement, that's about as good as it's going to get. They're not going to build, a luxury underground dwelling in which, they have running water and bathroom, things like that. If you've got the money, you go for it. But most people just can't do it. Start simple. It's better to be starting simple. What was it Brigham Young once said? Brigham Young said it's better to be one step out of hell and heading to heaven, one step out of heaven and heading to hell. And that little bit of preparation can go a long way. So maybe maybe you don't have to go out take a second mortgage to get a year or two's food. But come on, think about this. What if every time you went to the store, you bought one staple item extra and just put it away? What if when you're filling that grocery cart with all that food, what if you bought one extra rice? You know, one extra package of flour, a little bit of one extra package of pasta, one extra can of, I don't know, beans. I don't like beans, but hey, I mean, those kinds of things. What if you did that made that your New Year's resolution? Just one. Yeah, I should use that as a slogan. Make mean about it, a meme about it. Just one, and go out there and getting a little bit prepared. Tell me if you're watching these zombie films and they're sitting there going, "Oh my gosh, we're running low on food, we're running low on ammunition, running low on this and that, whatever," and you're thinking subconsciously, "Wow, I sure hope I wouldn't get into that kind of situation, where I'd be worried about feeding my kids." Well, you know what? Again, I'm not expecting any, half rotten zombies to be walking down the street in the near future, but it's a very good chance that you wind up with any of these other natural disasters hitting. And if it happens, then think of it. What if it's 5 years from now? What if it's 10 years from now? 5 years, just one uh, policy, and you're going to have a room somewhere, maybe a big chunk of your basement, shed, whatever, that's going to be filled with food that is non-perishable, and then that might get you through until you can start doing other things. I would also suggest throwing some seed. We'll try to get stuff that's not GMO. Uh, get seeds that are natural and store them away as like corn and beans, stuff like that. If they're stored properly, go a long ways. And that you may be planting them in the future and learn how to plant things. So teaching my daughters how to pieces off potatoes, plant potatoes. My wife was like, I mean, yeah, but she grew up in the city. I mean, the thing is, you got to learn how to do these because maybe it won't be just a hobby you do with kids in the future. Maybe instead it'll be what you need to do to survive. Now, I'd love to go on. We talked about zombies and vampires, and then we wind up with what happens when it falls apart. I don't know, but I think it's something we need to look at. And again, the whole thing that I said, that just one, try it out. Next time you go shopping, make it a habit, a little extra that you don't touch. Well, if you do touch, you broke it and get new stuff to replace it. Anyway, here we're almost out of time. But thanks for listening, and I hope you come back again next week for another episode of Unlocked Door Radio with Mike Cross here for UCY TV.